The story here goes back more than 100 years. It's embarrassing that we've known potentially about this for so long and it hasn't been really exploited until recently. It comes down to Maxwell's equations. Maxwell was a great physicist at the turn of the century, and he really told us that light is an electromagnetic wave. Before that, we didn't really know what it was, an electromagnetic wave. So that means light intrinsically has in it an electric field and a magnetic field. And that's the key to understanding how it goes through matter.
Magnetic fields are to warm-blooded animals what light is to plants. The magnetotactic organelle within our cells serves the same function that the phototactic chloroplast serves in the plant cell. Where a magnetic compass would not work properly, neither would we. The alternating magnetic field produced by AC voltage at 60 cycles per second retards the formation of magnetite particles within these bacteria. A lack of movement in the magnetic field is to animals what a lack of sunlight is to plants.
The chloroplast is the key to photosynthesis. Large numbers of chloroplasts are present in the mesophyll, the middle tissue of the leaf. In low light, they are distributed evenly, but bright light causes them to move to a less exposed position.
These are methods that cells use to move building materials around within themselves.
New cells are formed by cell division, in which one cell splits to become two cells. Cell division involves two processes. In the first, called nuclear division, the nucleus divides. In second process, cytokinesis, the cytoplasm divides, producing two cells.
Dr. John Chloronomos, a soil ecologist at the University of Guelph, has discovered a species of fungus that preys on insects and feeds their remains to the forest trees about here.
It is a fungus that's associated with trees. Actually, it's associated with many different types of trees. This particular one is associated with white pine. It forms mushrooms, but remember the mushroom itself is actually just the fruiting body. It's just the fruit, and the main body of the fungus is below ground, and that's where most of it is found. And it attaches itself to roots, and it extends out into the soil. Its fine filaments extend out into the soil because plants, of course, are very good at taking carbon dioxide and undergoing photosynthesis and forming sugars. And of course, the fungus can't do this on its own, so that's the exchange. Essentially, they're partners.
Oh, I see. So the tree gets some food out of the soil from the fungus, and the fungus gets a little sugar treat from the tree.
Exactly.
Well, how did you discover that this particular fungus was carnivorous, that it was preying on insects?
Oh, actually, it was by complete surprise. We did not expect that at all. We weren't even asking that question at all. All we were wondering was, well, we know that these insects are in the soil. In fact, they're very, very common. And because they're so common, and because we also know that their main diet is fungus, we were wondering, well, if this fungus is so important for the tree in terms of picking up nutrients from the soil, if this insect then comes around and starts eating it away, then it may actually be harming the tree, because the fungus will not be as effective at picking up nutrients.
What kind of insect are we talking about?
They're springtails. They're tiny insects. They have a little spring on their back. That's why we call them springtails, and they can jump up pretty high. They're small. They're approximately 1 millimeter in length.
Okay, so you thought the insects were harming the fungus, but how did you find out that it was the other way around?
And in fact, when we tested a number of different fungi to see if these springtails are feeding on the fungi, yes, in fact, they did. When we looked at this one type, this Lacaria, which is a very common fungus out there, we noticed that the animals were pretty much dying right away. They were not moving. They would be immobilized right away. After a few experiments, what we realized was that the fungus is producing a toxin of some kind, and it paralyzes the insect. They're still breathing, but they were completely immobilized. They were paralyzed, and that gave just enough time for the fungus to slowly grow into their bodies and eat them up alive.
Wow, it sounds like an awful way to go if you're an insect.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Basically, once you're paralyzed, then that's it. You're just waiting until you're eaten up alive.
Okay, so what is the fungus actually after? Why would it be killing the insect?
Well, the fungus is actually getting nitrogen. That was the main. And it might be getting other nutrients, too, but what we measured and what we know these mycorrhizal fungi do is they pick up nitrogen. They're able to gather nitrogen from the forest soil. Well, 50% of the nitrogen they gather up gets transferred to their tree partner. we actually labeled nitrogen in the insects, and we found that half of it actually remained in the fungus itself for its own growth, and 50% of it was traded away to the plant in exchange for those sugars that we talked about earlier.
So basically, the fungus is feeding nitrogen to the tree. I mean, isn't nitrogen a fertilizer? It's sort of like it's fertilizing the
that's
tree?
exactly it. And it could be that this type of predatory behavior may be present in soils where there isn't a lot of free nitrogen in the soil. And so these fungi have figured out another way to help trees out. They've developed mechanisms by which they can go after nitrogen that normally wouldn't be available, and that is in living organisms.
It's amazing. I mean, how much more nitrogen do they get this way if they didn't have this? If they just had the regular fungus that gets it out of the soil, what's the advantage of taking it from insects?
Well, we calculated in our small experiments again. We found that in seedlings, 25% of their nitrogen was insect-derived.
That's quite a lot.
So that's a lot. Yeah, that's a significant amount of nitrogen. And that's why I think this could be important ecologically, because we may have found a new source of fertilizer, basically.
How common do you think these carnivorous fungus are?
That's the big question. We have no idea, really. And the only reason we don't know is because no one's really looked. This particular fungus, Lacaria bicolor, is very common. It's a very common fungus. This actually might be very common for all we know. We have no idea. Because, again, it changes our idea of how nutritious our soils are. Living insects were never considered to be a source of fertilizer, really. Just to give you an idea of how abundant these insects are in the soil, when I was doing some work a few years ago in a maple forest, and I was looking at populations of insects in the soil, this one species, the species that I'm reporting here, in a maple forest soil of, let's say, 1 meter by 1 meter square, just to give you an idea of how big of an area, we found 100,000 individuals.
Wow.
1 meter by 1 meter square. And that's only of one species, and there are, maybe 30 species or so in any one site. So there's a lot of insects there, and they represent a huge amount of nitrogen.
The Venus's flytrap is a carnivorous or meat-eating plant. When an insect brushes against one of the sensitive hairs inside the leaf's 2 lobes snap shut, trapping the insect. A fluid secreted by the leaves digests the insect's soft parts.